Patrick.
And
This is
Yes,
But Why
podcast.
But I imagine you've pitched other things previous to this, right? So you at least know what the process of it is?
Yeah, and I do. I've pitched some things, and then we also had like a really good pitch class at USC where we would talk about like the general format for pitching something. And so, yeah, but I feel like I've only seriously pitched things like sat down in a room, and normally when I go to meetings, it's like a general meeting. So I'm just kind of pitching myself. So it's like you show up, and they're so annoying because they're such a waste of time, but you have to do them so that people know you, so they can be like, oh, I met Helen, she's great.
Yeah, hopefully. I hear it's like, it's half of the business is just schmoozing and making sure people know your face or your name.
Yeah, exactly. They call it like the water bottle tour, because you basically just go to different companies and offices, and they give you a bottle of water, and then you wait for forever, and then you sit down with someone, and they're like, hi. And they're like, so tell me your story. And so basically it's just like, okay, I was born in so I basically do some version of having been born in Wisconsin in the middle of cow country and being homeschooled for most of my life. And so I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I knew I can't be a writer if I don't have any experience. I need to get out into the world. And so then I went to college as far away as I could get a scholarship and proceeded to be very rebellious and, hitchhiked through Mexico, worked as a stripper briefly, slept in train stations, and then graduated college, worked as a reporter for a little while in Boston, and then when I realized how expensive Boston was, moved down to New Orleans with some friends where I started a newspaper with a friend of mine, and then realized what I really wanted to do was I would be writing these stories about people and realize that I wish that I could change just a couple details of the truth to make it a better story. And that's when I realized I'm not a reporter. I'm a writer. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble if I keep doing this as a reporter. And so that's when I started going back to fiction telling, which is where I always had initially come from. And then watching a lot of TV at that point, like The Wire and Sopranos, and realizing that I wanted to tell these longer TV stories that didn't have an ending. And so that's how I eventually moved to LA to go to school at USC. And from there I was working for Kenya Barris as my first job out of school, being his assistant. And then from Kenya Barris to being a script coordinator and writer's assistant at Grownish, where I wrote an episode of it. And that's what I'm doing now in addition to some development. So that's my 5-minute, tell me about yourself.
That's so great. That's like our whole interview. So we're done now. No,
okay, cool.
It's the shortest of all of our interviews, but she was the one most prepared.
Because I've been having to do that. A couple months ago, I went on a bunch of general meetings general meetings are usually not with showrunners. Showrunners are the people that will actually hire you on a show as a writer. And so the general meetings are with the gatekeepers even before that. So the executives who are in charge of current programming for a network or a production company. And so those people then are the first ones to kind of meet with you. And then if they like you, hopefully they'll then pass you on to their showrunners who are looking for writers and say oh, you were looking for a rebellious Catholic girl who has a lot of weird experiences. How about Helen?
Interesting.
I was just trying to think, where would I fit in?
It's funny, though. You're right. Really, you just tell your story and then somebody else is going to figure out where you're going to fit in, because who knows what new show has come out that maybe totally needs you. They're like, oh,
exactly.
Yeah. Oh, wait, you went to Catholic college? I need you. I need that reference or whatever.
Yeah, totally. You were homeschooled? Oh, I need that. I need someone who's homeschooled. I need
so
someone
funny that I've known you for so long. I did not know you were homeschooled. That's so interesting.
I didn't realize you didn't know. Yeah, and I probably didn't make a big deal of it in college because I was like, oh, I don't want to be the dork who was homeschooled. And I wasn't homeschooled for high school. So where I just came from, I hadn't been homeschooled. So
right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that talking about high school when they're in college, they're like, forget it. I didn't have a life before this. I'm here now.
Yes, you redefine yourself completely. You can be anyone you want. Or at least when we were growing up, you could, because we didn't have a fucking Facebook history telling everyone, you know what I mean?
Who we really are, yeah. Ooh, wow. I forgot about that. Like, you're opening my eyes to the fact that, like, and especially because you wrote on Grownish, you've probably, like, talked about this whole idea, but, like, the fact that kids cannot reinvent themselves in college. They are who they are.
Isn't that sucky? It really sucks.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
God.
100%. Yeah. No, we've totally talked about that, because that was such a big thing that so many of the writers who are like in their 30s and 40s are like, oh, we could 100% just completely, that was what college was for, is you try new personalities. And that's why sometimes too, like freshman year, you were almost like you were trying on one personality, and then sophomore year, you're like, all right, so I like this and that about that personality, but I really want to go back to more of this. And you just like literally kind of reinvent yourself.
But the interesting thing, too, even about the specific show Grownish, is that the audience has a preconceived notion of the character because they've seen her before. They've seen the actress. They've seen what she's done in the other show. So when they start watching the other show, they, like people who follow somebody on Facebook, have a preconceived notion of what they're bringing to the table. So everyone was like, oh, I know who Zoe is. And then they watch it and she goes through whatever. Super interesting. It's like it's like both levels of it. Oh, so
that's so true, because it is a spin-off, and so it has this, and we really have played with that a lot too, because she was like very much too cool for school in Blackish. She's like the perfect person who everything works out well. We often use her as someone who's like delivering burns. And you can't, perfect characters are no fun to watch as like the main one. So we really like this idea that like everything was so easy for her in high school. And she was like, not that high school was a small pond, but basically she was like a big fish in a small pond. And now that she's in college, the world is so much bigger, and she's around people. So like her boyfriend now that she chose at the end of season 1 is like this fashion designer doing exactly what she also wants to do. So we've been having a lot of fun too, looking at like, how is that going to play out if you're dating someone who's doing the exact same thing that you want to be doing?
Yeah. Oof. I'm sure everybody on a writing staff has that reference. Where they're like,
100%.
I write comedy and I'm dating a comedian that's the same, or I write for actors and I'm married to an actor. That's same. So interesting.
It's so funny. Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And a lot of most of our room is women this season. So it's like maybe 70% women and like 30% guys. No, less than that, because there's like 3 guys in a room of 12 people, so whatever that math is. But
I don't know what the math is.
Whatever that math is, who knows?
Guys, math is hard.
Guys.
That's kind of like the characters on the show. I mean, there's more women than men, so why not have the representation in the writer's room to develop it? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so what's been interesting too, though, is that a lot of the women that are in our writers' rooms, they do also have husbands who are writers, and they're just not currently working right now, because it's not like the best time in the world for guys to get staffed on shows.
Oh man, I bet it cannot be easy.
And I mean, for good reason. There were decades and decades. All of TV's history was a history of there only being one woman in the room. And if because they were like, okay, we got that one woman that we need, we're good. And if there were 2 women, you would not, according to what I've heard from my teachers and my bosses, like if there were 2 women in a room, you would not become friends because you knew one of you was not going to make it to the next season. It was like the Highlander. There could only be one. There was only one woman. There was only one Black person. If you are the one, know that you don't need to make friends with the other woman. You need to make friends with the dudes on the show who will hire you back. So it was like really gross and weird.
Yeah.
Luckily, we're kind of getting out of that, I hope. Although you still see all the time writers' rooms that are 100% white men, like older white men. And you're just like, okay. All right.
Well, I mean, the channels and and like all the schmoozing still exists the way that it did before, so it can be hard. It's like trying to go to a party where you don't know anybody. You're not really going to get invited. So how are they going to change if they don't invite a stranger to the party? People are afraid of that. So true. So, yeah, interesting.
It's so true.
So when you do a pitch with another person and you guys are both giving your like 5-minute life stories, do you have to figure out a way to make your life stories like simpatico so that they see you as a proper team? Or do you represent yourselves individually and then discuss how the two of you working together is right for this next project?
Yeah, well, so I think in this case, because we'll be pitching a project and not ourselves. So like if I were so she and I are not a writing team all the time. We're a writing team like for a couple of specific projects. So we don't go on general meetings together to be like, hey, meet this writing team. We go on specific pitches to be like, I'm pitching this one project to you. And so we do have a little bit of like life history stuff. But it tends, because we're not selling ourselves, we're selling this project, we really do tell the bits of our life history that has to do with what we're pitching. So like we're pitching, on Monday, we're pitching this series that basically takes place in a Korean plastic surgeon's office in LA. And so it is based on this job that my friend had out of college, having her first job as like this feminist filmmaker out of Tisch was to work at this Korean plastic surgeon's office. And so the two sides of her life came in conflict. Her American life and her Korean life are now both in the same place. And then also her sort of like feminist ideals versus like this, see, this is why I need to work on the pitch more.
No, totally, absolutely. I was like, this won't come out for a couple weeks. You work on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, we pitch it tomorrow morning.
No, I know, but I mean, like this episode when I release it won't be for a couple of weeks, so it's okay. Like, no, we're not giving anything away. You know.
Got it. Oh, awesome.
You'll have already had the meeting, and you'll be perfect. So it's cool.
Okay. Got it. Perfect. I love it. But yeah, so in this case, we're pitching her life story, and then we're pitching my life story in so much as I know what it's like to have to compartmentalize yourself, having very traditional conservative parents and very progressive liberal friends. I understand like having two faces that you present depending on who you're with, and having that tension of never being able to completely show who you are around everyone. And then from there, I can talk about how lots of people, like not a lot of people will have had like my friend's specific experience, but a lot of people will have had this experience of having these two lives that you can't share. And so that's kind of then how we get into the universality of it. So,
plus,
but I think you do
super
always
relevant right now with the way that like people who have one differing opinion can't even be in a room with each other. You know what I mean? So it's so like such a big deal right now that in this world, differences are so like just made huge, like magnified in a way that like you're like, I don't understand. Just because I happen to be born in Boston doesn't mean I inherently think this or whatever. You know, and I'm sure that could be a big problem with Korean families being like, this is the way it is. There's no way we're getting around it. It's what it's been for generations.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
I hate you. Yeah. Oof.
And that's a huge thing that you always have to do whenever you're pitching something pitching a specific project is give like a why now. Like, why is this particular theme? Why are these particular characters going to be specifically interesting now? Because it's like any show that ended up doing well, you can usually point to like some sort of cultural relevance or some, you know, of why it's important now. And so I think like what you're saying of being able to, people being able to go back and forth between sides and see other people's points of view, but then also on the beauty scale, having beauty and like appearances are more important now than ever before. Like people always have to be Instagram ready, and like and having these different sides of ourselves that we show in social media versus the real side of ourselves. And how
what happens to those actresses who for years were getting like collagen in their faces, trying to look younger, and yet now somehow our generation is coming up to them and going, you didn't have to do that. We're all going to support you and you're going to get jobs even if you have wrinkles. And it's like, why did I put so much effort into this? What?
Right. But, and I feel like that's not the case. I mean, I feel like there are parts of us that definitely like, like there's some, like looks are so important important in LA. And now like with Instagram, they're important for everyone. Like they're important. Writers have to be good looking because you'll have like your, like Instagram channel that you'll show whatever the hell. And it's like, you either have to be good looking or you have to have some kind of a brand, and whatever that brand is, it sort of has to be able to translate visually too, to be like, oh, I'm the woman with gray hair who lets my hair go gray because I'm this, it has to be a thing. You can't just be a writer who looks like shit because you don't really care because you're a writer who's behind a desk. Like, I feel like that's not a thing anymore. Like, you have to be a writer who has some kind of story about how you look. It's exhausting.
Some sort of political reason why you wear sweatpants.
Right. Yeah. If you're going to look shitty, you better have some excuse about why you look shitty. And by shitty, I mean natural.
You're just wearing a bunch of gray T-shirts that say feminist on it at all times. You're like, this is my
exactly. Just feminist. Because you'll also have people who are supermodels who are like, yeah, I'm a feminist and I've gotten a boob job and I get liposuction all the time. And you know what I mean? Like, it's so that's a whole other discussion. And we've gone into huge discussions in the Grownish room about feminism and what it means, because everybody had a different idea of what it means and what for sure would mean you're a feminist and what for sure would mean you're not. We could not agree at all.
I just read an article too about some like T-shirt company that was like touting themselves as being like super feminist, and then the guy who ran it, like the guy owner, was like super creepy. So all of the female employees asked him to step down, and he was and he fired everyone. Like in the middle of the night, he fired the entire staff, and now it like went viral, and people are like, "Fuck this brand!" But it was some feminist T-shirt brand that was like really like, it was all what I was saying. It was like gray T-shirts that said like support other women and stuff, but it was run by this dude that was apparently real grabby and a jerk to women. And it was like, what?
I mean, that makes complete sense to me too, because it's like you always have to wonder, like, first of all, if there's a straight guy in the fashion business, I'm a little suspicious. I'm like, it's like when there's a straight guy in casting. I'm like, what's your story? When is it going to come out about how gross you are? Like, it doesn't have to be that way, but I think it usually is.
I feel like if there isn't like a life story of like textiles in your family, like there's no reason for you to be working here. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, like you said, there could be a guy who's totally normal, everything's totally cool, but I'm just never surprised when the story comes out. And then if you add to that, like, oh, I'm super feminist, I'm like really up on all these issues, I was like, okay, it's like the guy from American Apparel that it came out that he was like really like gross. And I'm like, well, look at the ads that he approved. So like these girls in the corners they look like they've been kidnapped.
Yeah. The clothes are skin-tight cotton. How did you not think that was run by a gross man? Like, you're all
exactly.
idiots.
And all the models look underage. Like, come on.
Yeah.
all the signs were there.
Yeah, right?
We should have
like
known.
Ignoring signs, yeah. Oh, that's so funny. We should have known. Oh, boy. Oh, so interesting. So what a world that you live in now. How long have you been in Los Angeles now?
Since the summer of 2014, because I came out here to go to USC, so that was the end of August of 2014, and then it was a 2-year program. So yeah, so I came out. How you got into that, because that seems like a very prestigious program. How did you get into there? Because you were a few years out of college. Like, it wasn't like you went straight from college to it, or maybe that's their thing. They would never take somebody right out of college. But like, tell me about that little journey. Totally. I mean, you're very sweet to say you're a few years out of college. Yeah, just a few.
We're the same age. I'm not telling everyone how old you are.
Good, great. No, but yeah.
Unfortunately, my audience knows how old I am, so it's rough. Sorry.
Damn it. We went to college together, but I was a freshman when you were a senior.
When I was 8 years out, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love it. But yeah,
like,
so
don't let me bring us back to the first time we went to a rave. That might come up. All right, back to USC.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it. Our first rave. Okay, yeah. So so a lot of this has to do with my husband too, who really encouraged me to go here. When I first met him, like for our very first date, I was talking about how I wanted to go to UNO for their film program. Or I wanted to go to UNO for the creative writing program. And then as he and I got to know each other and spent more time together, he eventually encouraged me to write a script for the first time, like a screenplay, instead of I had been writing short stories and working on a novel for a million years. And when I first wrote a script, I was like, oh, this is all the things that I like about writing. This is just the story and the dialogue. I don't have to describe how somebody's fingernails are like half moons. I don't have to have a bunch of analogies and metaphors. Just fuck all of that. I can just tell a story and have dialogue. And those are my favorite pieces. And so I really enjoyed it. And, we did, I wrote and then we produced together a feature film that my husband acted in and directed called Flood Streets that's on Amazon. You guys can watch it. It's free on Amazon Prime.
Very good.
But then that made me realize that I really wanted to do TV because it was basically this ensemble. It was kind of like Shortcuts, but set in post-Katrina New Orleans. And then made me realize that I really wanted to do TV and have these sort of ensemble things. And so I applied a couple of times to the missioner program at the University of Texas at UT Austin. Never got in. I think the first year they did not get my application and then they covered. But I think the second year they did get my application and I just didn't get in. But I wanted to go to that program because it was close, so that I wouldn't have to uproot my life, and then they pay you to go there. But the more that I started realizing, because a lot of film stuff was coming to New Orleans at the time, which is where I was living, and the more that I realized how the film industry worked, I realized I really had to be in LA. And I was starting to get frustrated with different projects that I had tried in New Orleans, not really getting off to a huge start. I'd always had fun and I was learning a lot, but I felt like my career wasn't really progressing. And so I wanted to go back to school to get an MFA because then at the very least I could teach. And Joseph was the one, my husband was the one who was like, if you're going to go back to school for film, you should at least try to get into the best schools. And I was like, I tried to get into UT Austin. And he's like, no, try to get into LA. And I was like, are we really going to pay for that A? And B, are we really going to move there? And he's like, just see if you get in. So I applied to USC and UCLA, and USC was the one that I really wanted to get into because they are more focused on TV, and they're also, the vibe is that they're more industry focused, whereas UCLA is a little bit more indie focused. And I had already done an indie. I wanted to get in the club. I didn't want to work outside of the club anymore. I was ready to, any of the clubs, I wanted to join them all. Any way to sell out, I wanted to do it. And then eventually put in my own twist and put in my own, opinions and view on life once I'm inside. Yeah. And so I applied to both of them, and the USC application has I can't remember if you turn in maybe the first 10 pages of some work you've previously written, but the huge part of the application is these essays, and then you have to write these 2 scenes that are no more than 5 pages. And they're very specific. They give you a prompt for them. And I don't know if the prompt changes from year to year, but it tends to be something for my year, it was write 2 scenes. And the first scene, it's New Year's Eve, and there's 2 people who are very, very much opposites in whatever way you decide. 2 people who are opposites go into an elevator on New Year's Eve and get stuck in the elevator. And so it's that kind of typical kind of setup, but they're really looking at how do you create the characters, how do you move the story forward, how do you do it all in a scene that's under 5 pages long. And then the second one was 2 people who live together. They can be any relationship to each other, but they live together. One of them wants to leave and the other one doesn't want them to. And that can mean whatever you want it to mean. And so it was really interesting once I got in to see we all shared our writing exercises from that prompt. And it was so interesting to see how different everybody's were and how many the different ways there are of interpreting that. But I thought it was cool because it was a way of showing, because USC is so industry focused, it was a way of showing that you can shine on assignment, which is what TV writing is. It's you bringing your voice and your experience, but to somebody else's show, most of the time to somebody else's show. And even if it's your own show, to somebody else's network, to somebody else's lineup. So you know what I mean? Like there's always going to be some kind of box that you're going to have to put this thing in. And can you still make it new and interesting and exciting and different and something that only you can write? That I didn't learn so much at USC, but that I learned even more working for Kenya Barris. Is he's really big on proprietary stories. Like, what's a story that only you can tell? You should only be telling those stories because no one else can do that better than you. So tell those stories that you're the only one who can.
Yeah, that's so great. I like the idea of those two prompts as well because they deal with relationships between people who know each other and then people who don't. And that's the two possible kinds of relationships you can have with strangers and with people you're connected to. So it's like, hey, can you write both of these? It's like, oh, yeah, okay. That's so fascinating. I also would be like, I love the idea that there's likely a staff who you've probably met at this point who reads all of that. Like that there are people whose whole job it is to read all of that.
Yeah. Exactly. Like I can't even imagine. And they do that. And they also they look at your resume. They look at because once I got into the program, I went to the Writing for Screen and Television program of the School of Cinematic Arts of the MFA program. So there's a bunch of different branches of the cinema school, but for the writing one, they accept 32 students a year. So, and it's a 2-year program. So at any moment they have a cap of 64 students in that program at any time. So they know everybody that gets in. And there were people from Alaska to Hawaii, America, Turkey, Afghanistan. Obviously, you have to be incredibly fluent in English to be in the writing program. But there are people from all over the world with tons of different experiences. People who had been working in production for a really long time. There were a couple of people, to answer your question, who were just out of college, who were just out of undergrad, but they had already made some kind of a big move. And it's interesting because I'll notice. So my year, we were all slightly older and more experienced than the year before us or after us, because it was a slightly different committee of people choosing. And so it's so much, this has made me realize how much, when you get rejected from something, how fickle it all is. It could be the person, you know what I mean, who happens to be, and it means nothing. And to the point that I have a friend who, and I won't call her out, but she interviewed to be the writer's PA on a show. And the writer's PA is kind of the lowest person, but within the writer's room. You're the one who gets lunch for the writers. You make sure there's enough snacks. You make copies. She did not get that job. A couple months later, she went back and interviewed to be the writer's assistant, which is a much higher up position. They often will get a freelance script because they're the ones taking the notes in the room. They're the ones organizing the notes. They're the ones who have to hear all the pitches and have a really good sense of the characters. She got the job as the writer's assistant because no one realized that she had previously applied and been denied as the writer's PA. So she ended up she couldn't get a job for this lowlier job, but then got this better job. So it's so fickle. It's so fickle.
Yeah, I wonder, how sometimes they'll say you're overqualified for a job? Is that something that, because you talk about how your group was an older group, but the others on either side of you were younger. Is there an air of, young winds in there? Or, I guess your group is hopeful for those of us who are older, but is it the norm, or were you guys such an anomaly that people were like, it's crazy that anybody was born in the 70s. It's so crazy. I don't know.
Late 70s, Amy. Late 70s.
I meant the other people, not you. You're clearly born in 2001. I know.
Great. Thank you. No, it's true. So I think that's a super interesting thing. Well, there's two sides of that. First of all, youth is sexy in Hollywood. It is, it always will be. It's sexy because people want the next big thing, and the next big thing, like they want young people so they can get young audiences, because advertisers want young audiences. They want young people because if you have a show that seems like it understands young people, even old people will watch it and be like, what are the young people saying? And also, like, in terms of comedy, people feel like comedy moves so quickly and is so different generation to generation that you don't want someone who's going to do like an old school sitcom unless they have a fresh take on it. You want someone who's going to have something fresh and new and exciting and interesting. Not to say that someone who's older can't have that, but just in general, Hollywood is dumb and blunt and obvious. So on that sense, youth is valued because of that. But as a writer, you're totally valued for having experience, and for having life experience, and also like wisdom that comes into a room. So like our teachers would always say at USC, like, one of the best things you can do as a writer is to go into therapy, because basically a lot of TV shows are like mini therapy sessions where you then have to get down to like, why are they really doing this? What's really at stake? What would they really think? And so you have to kind of know yourself pretty well to understand that. And young people can have a good understanding of themselves, but more often you don't quite have that much self-awareness yet. So in that sense, like, age and experience is really helpful. And so in terms of like getting a job as like a writer or a creative producer, it depends, do you have like a young mindset where you can be open to new, fresh ideas? Are you coming in, even if you're older, are you coming in from a different career that gives you this fresh perspective on the industry? I find like there is definitely ageism in Hollywood, but I find that it tends to be more the way people present themselves. If you're like mid-40s or early 50s and you're talking about Grownish and The Last OG and Search Party, people aren't going to really think about how old you are. But if you're going in and you're talking about Frasier and Cheers, and I was going to say Roseanne, but that's not topical again. But if you're like just talking about like old, and the A-Team, or if you're just like talking about old shows, like, oh, my favorite show is Frasier, and it's never gotten any better than that, no one's going to want to hire you, because they're going to be like, well, that's great, but we're not even doing Roseanne. It has a new take than if you were doing Roseanne then, and now it definitely has a new take.
Yeah, you're like, my favorite show is Friends, is and always will be, and I don't see how it's weird with current times. It's funny. I've been watching old shows with an eye for our current cultural shift, and there are some shows, like recent shows, that I cannot even stomach anymore, and I loved it. One of which is one of my favorites, How I Met Your Mother. And don't get me wrong, Neil Patrick Harris can hold, like, I would let him like take my baby for 6 months if he wanted to, because I think he's so great. But the character that he plays on the show is so abhorrent and so culturally current in his disgustingness that when I watch it, I just have such a hard time now.
Yeah, in a way that you wouldn't have before. Yeah. And it's such an interesting thing, too, because I really think that TV, I mean, movies do this, too. Like, if you watch Revenge of the Nerds now, you're just like, oh, like, some people got sexually assaulted in that movie. People had sex with people they thought were other people, like, and it's all just supposed to be funny and cool because the nerds got laid, and it's like, whoa. But
16 Candles is a terrible, terrible movie about a horrible, burgeoning sexual assaulter who finds the hottest girl and who is handed a drunk hot girl and loses his virginity with her. And she's like, whatever, it's fine. I'm like, oh my God. Like, you watch these old things and you're like, how did this go? Like,
yeah. It was the room full of older white guys that I was talking about. And they're like, yeah, this is fine. This is cool. Like, we never, like, but it happened in TV too. And so, like, there's this level of things that were acceptable before that are not at all acceptable now. And I think it happens even more with TV than with movies, just because TV has more episodes of things where, like, you'll watch certain shows and be like, oh, there is so much, like, so many jokes that rely on homophobia, and so many, like, it would be so hard to, like, Yeah, and so I think that's like, it's a huge thing with TV is being socially, especially with comedy, being socially responsible and funny at the same time. And
something that you brought up that I think is really super interesting too is like the thing that you said about going to a therapist so you can kind of like be able to see like the reasons why people would do something, even right or wrong, no judgment of the character, but you can be like, oh, here's a way that somebody looks at this, or this is a way that it could be interpreted, just so that you can kind of view a larger format. And I had an experience maybe last year, maybe the year before, when I was working at Austin Film Festival and I was hosting like this series, a Q&A for a series of shorts. And there was this one short that was I didn't look at who made it before I watched it. I just watched it, wrote down my notes about what I thought it was about and questions that I had to ask them in the Q&A. And then afterwards, I went through and researched all the people who made it so that I could look at it without any judgment. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be like, oh, well, this guy wrote it. So there's this short film, and it's set in the 1980s, and it's about a debate team. And on the debate, there's this one guy who's super great at debate, whatever. And after this successful debate, he and the rest of the debate team get on the bus on the way home. And he's sitting in a chair next to this cute girl who has flirted with him 3 or 4 times in the short previous to them getting on the bus. And you see that this character, the girl character, is very much got a crush on him. So you're like, oh, look at them, they're together. But she's asleep in the chair, and she's asleep next to him. And while she's asleep, he reaches over and grabs her boob. And then she wakes up.
It's Al Franken.
Well, yeah, I guess, but he touches her and she's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, sorry. And she's like, it's okay. I like you anyway. Right. So I'm like, this is super weird. I was like, is this a message about consent? What sort of weird topic is this? And I wrote all these questions down, I look it up. It was made by this older white man. And I'm like, okay, man, this guy's woke as fuck coming up with this stuff. Interesting that he would talk about it. When I get the guy at the Q&A and I'm asking my first questions, I say to him, this is so political right now. There's so much talk of consent, and it really, opens your eyes to like, even though she does like him, is it okay? No, it's not. So what happened between them? Could they ever date after this experience? Even though she does like him, he's violated that trust. And the guy was like, I never thought of it that way. He's like, I didn't even know that was what it was about. And the audience was like, what? The whole audience, hands flew up in the air, and people were like, are you kidding me? The entire thing is about consent. It's about 2 people having feelings, and how do you make sure that both of their feelings are, respected? And I was like, how interesting. And I kind of quieted down the audience because I was like, guys, I appreciate your outrage and I hear you, but I am fascinated with the fact that he did not see this, and I want to know what he meant when he made it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was like, dude, tell us. And then he just explained, whatever thing he thought of, about coming of age, about making mistakes, about a guy. In his thought, it was a guy who seems to have everything together, but who makes this gaffe that could ruin all the previous efforts he'd had to be a good guy. And I was like, that is so interesting. It's just so fascinating how this man could create this film that was blaringly about this one topic, yet he had no idea. I mean, the look on his face, it was priceless. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, but he knew that it was about consent. He knew, when he said about this guy making a gaffe, the gaffe was him touching her while she was asleep, right?
I think to him, the gaffe was that at the end, the girl kind of doesn't date him. So the gaffe was missing the proper chance, I guess. Somehow if he had groped her in a different way, it would have been better. And I was just like, You're so fascinating. Tell me what your brain thinks. Like, and you know, I don't want to judge that. My job was not to judge this man. My job was just to present topics to a crowd that watched this stuff. And I mean, the other writers, because like it's a bunch of shorts. So I got like 6 writers to talk to. And I talked to him first, and the rest of them are all like, whoa, what's happening? You know?
Were the rest of them guys or girls or a mix?
It was a mix. It was like there were a couple where it was like a guy and 2 girls that made it, and then another girl. And, you know, so it was different. It was different groups and also different age groups. Like this guy was clearly in his 50s, you know what I mean? And I was just like, you know, because a lot of what you were saying earlier about how, like, if you want to be an older person in the industry, you have to realize that the industry is looking towards what is young and new. So it's great that you have all these experiences, but you need to relate them to the current cultural, like, world. Yeah. So that you're not just like, oh, man, I didn't realize. Because I was like, what, did you set it in the 80s? Because, and I was trying to help him. I'm like trying to dig him out of his hole to like be like, oh, okay, so like the 80s was a weird time. There was a lot of political strife. That's why you picked it. And he was like, oh, and I just picked it because that's when I was in high school. I was like, cool. Okay. Trying to help you, buddy. Trying to help you. Like,
oh, that's, it's so interesting to me. Yeah, so it's a combination of like, you have like the industry is interested in like what's new and in current culture, but it's also like if you're going to be creating TV shows or movies, that is current culture. So you need to know what else is in that sphere. Like, you know, like you can write the story about the time that you were a teenager and grew up with someone in the 80s, and you can set it in the 80s, but you have to write it with an understanding. But that film that's made in 2018 has to have an understanding of what's happening in 2018. You know what I mean? It's so interesting, but it was interesting to me too is what you said about how like you weren't there to judge him, you were there to facilitate a conversation. And I think that's the thing. I know that was specifically your job in that moment, but that's also the thing that working on these Kenya Barris shows that I've noticed is so much of what he does is it's not landing in one place or the other. It's just starting a conversation and like making people feel okay about having the conversation. So like with Blackish, a lot of it is about race, like having this conversation about race and realizing how little people talk to each other too, from different races. And like he has all these different stories about different times when he would notice that. But one time was when he was going to get his haircut and he got tired of getting his haircut at the barber because he was so busy. And so he started having the barber come to his office and he would get his haircut in his office. And one of the white guys was like, why do you need to do that here? Like, what do you what is every 3 months? How big of a deal can it be? And Kenny's like, what are you talking about every 3 months? I have to get my hair cut every week. He has like very short hair. He's got a fade. He's like, do you think that this naturally stays this way for 3 months? And he's like, oh, I don't know. I guess I did. He's like, look how short it is. Do you think this? He's like, how often do you get your haircut? He's like, yeah, every 3 months. He's like, I would look like a monster. He said, but he was like, there was just no, like, it had never occurred to Kenya that a white guy would go 3 months without getting his haircut. And it had never occurred to this white guy that a black guy would get his haircut every week. Like, even though they both see each other every day and they're working together every day, like just not having that conversation makes you realize how much we come at issues from our own experience. And so in Grownish isn't so much about race. It's much more about, it's not exclusively about this, but because it takes place in a college, there's a lot about youth culture, about wokeness, about outrage, about progressive kind of ideas and what those are striving for, how they fall short sometimes. But so we'll often get in conversations about like talking about the Me Too era and talking about like how colleges are trying to handle that with different policies that are like very heavy-handed and very weird, but it's like at least those policies are trying to do something good, even if they might not be quite there, and at least that's starting this conversation. And so we can end an episode. We often like look at it like it's almost like a thesis, where someone starts out feeling this way, completely sure that they're right, and then they end up hearing from people who have completely different experiences than them. They're coming from a different place. And in the course of that, they start to realize they may still believe the same thing they believed before, but with more knowledge now, or they've changed their mind, or they're not sure and they're like, all right, I'm listening. Like, but it's all about like if you can't at least have that conversation, like that white guy, if everyone starts attacking him when he says, like, no, this is, a story about a guy who makes a gaffe, and people are like, gaffe, it's not a gaffe, it's assault. And he starts getting jumped on like that, then people won't even have the conversation. And that dude's not going to change his mind. He's just going to be like, well, you got to be really careful around these, liberals. And so I feel like that's not the right answer. Like you have to be able to hear where people are coming from. And, like, older people are going to, like, they're just going to have it. Like, older people to me are so, like sometimes with their opinions, like, you'll talk to, like, a much older guy, and he'll be like, with sexual assault, he'll be like, there comes a point where you can't say no, you've gone too far. It's a point of no return. And I'm like, that's disgusting and untrue. But then, like, some young people will be like, oh, someone has had a drink, and if they're not sober, they can't consent. And I'm like, drunk sex is amazing. Like, you're crazy. So you have to realize just, like, how youth culture is always pushing things. And I just have to remember how I feel about people who are much older than me, or whose ideas are more stagnant. And I guess I have to work hard to not be that person. When I hear new ideas and I'm like, you're insane, I'm not going to call you they. I have to be like, you know what? Hear them out. Shut up and listen for a second.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in your current position, creating new television shows for the culture, you're part of the crowd that is going to be helping us understand how to navigate the world together. And that in and of itself is such a huge, like, thing that you have as both an ability and a responsibility to the people that are receiving your, watching your shows. Like, I loved Grownish because it reminded me of us in college. It was like, I was like, this is us in the student apartments, like, hanging out, having crazy conversations, like, so real, totally brought me back. And right before I watched it, I had been feeling very disconnected of that time in my life. Like, I told somebody previous to that, like, I didn't know I was having a real hard time remembering what dating was like. Like, I was like, I get it. But at this point, I've been, with the same partner for a long, long time. Like, I don't know what it's like. I don't remember what it was like back then. I definitely don't know what it's like now. You know what I mean? But watching that, so I was like, oh, it's so interesting. Like, the way they have to navigate, and, like, even the things where it's like the texting and the constant social media connection. You can't even, like, get away from each other. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting to, like, soak up and to know about it. And yet it still felt so, like, I don't know, connected to my experience, which was, 20 years before. I mean, 2 years before.
Yes.
I know we only have a little bit more time, so I wanted to ask you a couple of things that I think people who listen to the podcast would be interested in knowing. And I would love to know not only how you got into the Blackish Writers Room, but, like, what the experience was for you and how that led you to the Grownish Writers Room.
Yeah, so I worked on season 3 of Blackish, and it was when I graduated. So I graduated 2016, and in May of 2016, and then basically obviously didn't have a job lined up for up until August of that year. So I had 3 months of where my roommate was working all the time, and so he would go to work, and then I would just be home in our apartment alone, like, working on scripts that I hoped somebody would buy. I started going to therapy for the first time during those 3 months. It was very helpful.
Noted.
Right? In terms of, like, the anxiety and the, like, here, I had just gone to this incredibly expensive program and moved halfway across the country, and my husband was still in New Orleans at the time, and I didn't even have a job. It was very stressful. So I was to make money, I was doing, like, tutoring, like, very rich high school kids whose parents paid a lot, and so these kids basically would try to get you to write their papers for them, and so you'd have to, like, negotiate with these very lovely but very demanding children. But so I was doing that, and then trying to work on my own stuff. And one of the girls that I had gone to school with, one of the other students who was in the production program, had remembered me from a class, and she was good friends with the head of development for Kenya Barris's company. And so she heard that this person was looking for an assistant and brought me in for an interview. And so this girl was like still going to school at the time, but then it was like basically because of her referral that I got in front of Kenya. And then I didn't get that first job that I applied for to be the head of development person's assistant because I wanted to be a writer and not do development as much. But then like 3 weeks later, I got a call from them and they were like, Kenya needs an assistant specifically. So will you come in and like be his assistant? So for that year of the third season of Blackish, I wasn't in the room so much. I would kind of go in the room periodically to cover for the other writers' assistants, but I was the showrunner's assistant. So that's like, I was Kenya's assistant. So you're generally out of the room a little bit, and then you try to look for an opportunity to get into the writer's room. So what was great about that job was that when you're somebody's assistant, you are on all of their phone calls. It's the weirdest thing to me when I first got to Hollywood that this happens, but like anytime your boss is on a call, unless he tells you to hop off, you're always on that call on mute, like taking notes in the background. So that like if he says, oh yeah, I'll call you tomorrow and I'll give you the summary for that, I then know to write myself a note like, okay, tomorrow I need to remind him that we have to give them the summary for that. But then you end up hearing negotiations, after negotiations, you hear notes from the studio and the network on different things. So I would hear notes about Blackish and then notes about these other projects that he was developing. And then I would also hear the way that he would pitch to people on the phone, because like when you're as busy as he is, this pitch that we're doing, it's that I'm getting ready for tomorrow, we're going in and it's an in-person pitch. If I were of his caliber, they might just call me on the phone and want to hear like an initial idea about it and then be like, oh, that's awesome. So come in. And then like, in other words, my first in-person pitch would be with higher level people from the get-go. So I would hear him do all of these like mini pitches on the phone, and he would go from being in the middle of a story in Blackish, deep in a story trying to fix it, to then going and pitching a completely different story. I would pull him out of the room and he'd pitch a completely different story, series, everything to an actor's agent. And then that agent would be like, okay, that's cool. I'll have him call you tomorrow, and can you pitch it to him? Yeah, no problem. So then the same thing would, you know what I mean? He would go from a Blackish story to then getting notes from the network on something that he was working on to then pitching something to an actor. And he would do this all within like 10 minutes. And so that was great. It wasn't as much experience being inside a writer's room, but it was so much development experience of like, this is how on you have to be. This is how these are all the games that you have to play, that no matter like how high up you are, there's certain people you have to go through. There's certain things you have to say. There's a certain way the business works, and you have to work within that. And then also like you have to have all these stories in your mind at any point, and so you have to make them stories that you care about enough that you remember them. But so then from that, so he had, when I was working for him, he had these 3 pilots that he was working on. One of them was Grownish. And so when I started working for him, within like a month or 2, he read one of my scripts, which is really early on in this business for a boss to like read your script. But he really liked it. He liked my perspective of coming from this like very conservative family, but then having a bunch of liberal friends. So he feels like I can, like I'm not like necessarily a specific member of a specific tribe. Like I'll listen to people from all points of view. Like I have my opinions, but I don't hate someone for their opinion, because I'm used to having people around me who have different opinions than me. And so he liked that aspect of it. And so then when Grownish got picked up, he asked if I wanted to go in the room for that as a writer's assistant. But then he gave me, and the showrunner, so he created the show, but then often you'll have another showrunner because he has so many shows going. So he'll then help. And this will happen too, like this isn't the case for him now, but when he started Blackish, he hadn't run a show before. So he was the creator, but then they bring in like a very experienced showrunner that like the network and the studios are very comfortable with. And that person kind of runs the show with the creator. And so like on an ideal case like Blackish, those two will totally get along well together and everything will be great. But I have heard stories about shows where like the creator and the showrunner don't see eye to eye, and the creator's like, this is what we should be doing. And the showrunner's like, you've never run a show, you don't know how to do this. And then it's a disaster. But the showrunner the showrunner for Grownish was someone that he had picked that he had worked with before, and then she really got along well with me and the other writer's assistant, and so then they all agreed to give us an episode last season, which was great because we were then able to like go outside of the room and take a week off to write the episode. So in comedy, you'll break the stories together as a room, and depending on the show, it'll be more detailed or less detailed. Ours is very detailed. We'll like break it on the whiteboards, and we call it microboards, because they'll have like ideas about conversations, joke pitches, everything. And then from that, the writers will do an outline, and you usually get a couple of days to write the outline. And for like our 30-page scripts, it'll be like an 8-page outline, single-spaced. And then that outline has so much in it. Then from that outline, you'll get a week to write the script. So me and the other writer's assistant were writing it together. So we came into work just in case they needed us, but we had already trained the writer's PA and the showrunner's assistant to kind of cover for us. So we were able to just like be out and be writing for a full week, which to me was like the dream, because it's like I was showing up at work and my work was to write, which normally you always have to hide that. You have to like be writing in between your other jobs or writing when everything else is done. But right now I could just be like, we're writing right now. We're going to shut the door, and it was like a sense of like my dream job. And then we were able, when we shot that episode, we were able to go down on set and be like the writers on duty on set for it, which was a great experience, because I've done a lot of indie stuff, but I hadn't done a big production like that. So to go from being like the one who wrote and produced and is, doing set locations and SAG paperwork and crafty and everything, to then just being the writer who shows up and is like, hey, does anyone have a headset for me? Great, where's my chair? I think it's amazing. It was amazing. You really can focus on just the story and the emotional arcs and make sure that you get everything that you need, so that no matter what the showrunner says or no matter what the network or the studio say, what notes they give you, you've got something for them. Be like, oh, you wanted more of this? We got it. Well, so that was really great. And so then we had a season of Grownish, and then over the hiatus, I worked on like a pilot, and then came back onto Grownish, this time as a script coordinator, which is like a step above the writer's assistant.
Awesome. That's so cool. Man, that's so great. I'm so proud of you for all that work that you've done and all the effort you've put in. And I mean, it is so not a surprise even at all that you would be where you are, because you've just worked so hard since you were like, let me dig myself into this. Let me really be a writer. And like from the newspaper in New Orleans, turning it around to this is just super wild and awesome. Yeah. So one last thing right before you have to skedaddle, I wanted to ask you if you had one piece of advice for anybody who might be listening who is interested in getting into television writing. What do you think is something that they should do, or a connection they should make, or a festival they should be part of, or maybe you just say go to USC? Who knows? Maybe that's the key to it all. What piece of advice do you think you could have for burgeoning writers?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the overall advice is to always be writing all the time, sort of no matter what you do, even if you have like a job in the industry and it's really hard to write. Like obviously you have to take care of your health first, but once you're sleeping enough hours and you're not getting sick, you need to like either wake up early or stay up late or stay in during your lunch break, whatever it takes to be writing for like at least an hour a day. Because it's like, if you are a writer and you're presenting yourself as a writer, when at some point, someone is going to ask to read something that you've written, and you need to have something good. And you need to have something ready. You can't be like I know some people who are like, oh yeah, I'm a writer. And then I'm like, great, can I read something? Oh, I haven't, I'm in the midst of rewrites of this and I'm in the midst of rewrites of that. It's like, always have something ready. It can even be a short story, but something ready that's, it doesn't have to be the most polished thing in the world. I mean, it shouldn't have crazy typos, but for sure it should like show your point of view and it should stand out. It should be memorable and it should show your point of view. want to write as a sample something that's just completely down the middle, something that doesn't make a splash or isn't memorable, something that's like, when I was going to school, I did a lot of internships where I would do coverage, which is where you were there the first day that I was doing coverage for one of my internships. You were staying with me when I was applying to one of these internships, and I had just read some feature that I was supposed to be giving coverage on. And my least favorite kind of script would be the one that you read the first page and you kind of know everything that's going to happen. And it doesn't, and there's no surprises in there. There's no pleasures in there. Like, I'm totally fine with a genre film sticking to the genre and doing what it's supposed to do, but something about it has to like grab you or surprise you or like make you, it has to be different from what you expected. Otherwise, why read it? And particularly, like, if you're doing something that's a sample, that's just completely on spec for yourself, for, you know, to show your voice if somebody reads it, you want it to be something unique and memorable and that highlights your strengths.
Good. Yeah. Good stuff. You're good at that. So you were all like, oh, I'm not sure what to say, but you had some sweet advice. Look at that.
Well, by the end, I was ready.
Awesome. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Well,
and in terms of festivals, you were asking about, I think the Austin Film Festival is kind of like the gold standard in terms of festivals for writers. It's one of the biggest. If you place in that festival, and they have so many different categories. There's, you know, films. There's TV series, drama, comedy. I think they also have web, and they also have specs. So like you could do a spec of an existing show. If you place in any of those, you are immediately on people's radar in Hollywood. You are like a person to watch. There's that one. There's the Nichols Fellowship is another big one. And obviously, like, if you're a filmmaker in South by Southwest, that's a big one too. But yeah, I think it's all about like knowing your strengths. Are you predominantly a good writer but don't have any production experience? That's fine. Then just like write all the time and write great stuff. If you're like a filmmaker who also writes their own stuff, then shoot something that's really good.
Yeah. Cool. That plays right into my audience of Austinites. I really appreciate that.
Right. Yeah, I'm telling you. Yeah. I mean, they may have never accepted me into the program, but...
Well, you know what, though? UT is such a weird, like, school because it's not just a school that a lot of people want to go to because of its programs. It's also a state school, so it's got a lot of stuff to deal with. It's got a lot of things to juggle. So, and in fact, it seems like it was the right thing for you not to get in that program anyway. USC was waiting for you.
Oh, totally.
So you had to not go to UT, or else it would have totally changed your trajectory. Awesome.
Yeah, who knows what I would be doing now.
Right? You'd be a UT professor, and it'd be very nice, but it wouldn't be this.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. I know that you're busy and preparing for your pitch. I hope everything goes great, and I can love to... I'm vicariously living through you, all your great projects, and I'm just really excited for everything that you have going in the future.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for talking with me.
Absolutely.
And being interested.
Yeah. Well, I'm really just glad that I can share the stories of the people that I know personally who have been able to, sort of break through what feels like a really tough door to get into the business. So I know a lot of people with the hasn't quite happened. So the fact that you went there, you worked hard, you got in the right room, you met people, you made it happen. It's empowering, and it gives a lot of people, hope, and gives them, tools to make themselves ready for their chance.
Nice.
All right. Well, thanks, Helen. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Yes But Why podcast.